Hello, everybody, and welcome to World Talks, where every word matters. My name is Don Arleth. And welcome to our continuing coverage of the European parliamentary elections. The polls are closed, ballots cast and counted. The results are in, and only now can we start to contemplate what lies ahead for the next European Parliament. The far right got a boost, the EPP gained seats, and Ursula von der Leyen looks certain to retain her position as the President of the European Commission. Now to sort through the nuts and bolts of this new construction is the first Polish EU Commissioner and former MEP Danuta Hübner. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us on TVP World.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Hello.
Yes, now that the results are in from these European Union elections, what was the most surprising development of all for you?
Actually, you might be surprised, but most of us probably expected that there will be kind of stronger populist tsunami in these elections visible. And indeed, when we have now the elections behind, we can also say that Europe was not given to the far right. It's true that they share in the European Parliament in the seats just has grown a bit. It's probably around 25%, but they don't have majority. They will not be able to block the work of the Parliament, but certainly there will be some influence when it comes to the agenda, because what is ahead of us, and we don't discuss it yet, it's not just to have the Parliament, to have the whole political cycle done, which means the President of the Commission, the members of the European Commission, then also towards the end of the year, the election of the President of the European Council. So that's, although institutional issues, all those issues are extremely important, but there are also things to do, and there is an agenda, and the agenda is quite challenging. So that's probably where we will be hearing a lot from those 25% of the far right colleagues that might have and will have most likely a different view on the future of Europe, and the Europe of their dreams is definitely different than Europe of those who are seen more as pro-European or mainstream parties or political groups.
Right. Now, we were expecting this pivot to the right, and it looks like it has panned out to some degree. Unity of these Eurosceptic parties is and was the big unknown. But looking at the results, will the far-right parties, in your opinion, do you think they'll change the direction of the Parliament, or do you think that they'll simply maybe slightly influence some of the bigger mainstream-centric parties?
I definitely think that there will be influence, as also because I think the agenda for the years to come will be, as I said, divisive one, but also a difficult one, challenging. What will be at stake is actually the enlargement, as you know. And here I think there might be a strong push towards slowing it down. There is an issue which was also, we could see it also on the streets of Europe over the last months, which is the climate ambitions and the Green Deal. Again, on these issues, the far right has a rather different opinion than I still can say the majority in the European Parliament. And then, of course, we will also have the discussion, which probably will also start during the Polish presidency next year, about the future budget. And we hoped, actually, we still hope that we will have an ambitious budget. Europe is chronically, permanently underinvested, and we need a lot of investment to do everything we have on our list to do things. And on this, I think the not pro-European, non-pro-European or far-right parties have always had the ambition of limiting the budget to the absolute minimum. So, and if we do it, then of course we cannot do what citizens expect from us. And then of course there will be this gap between the expectation and what will be really done by the European Union. So this will mean damage to credibility of the European Union, and this can accelerate further the shift to the right. So that's why it is so important that that the mainstream parties, that the majority is just as big as possible. I personally hope that it will not be only the European People's Party, the Socialists and Democrats, and the Renew group, but also the Green group, which is like the Renew group, I think, cut by 1/3 probably. But I think they have been always playing, benefiting from being a kind of radical and extreme views group, often saying no to the proposal of the mainstream parliament. But I think now the time has come for them also to become the mainstream, become this traditional European centrist majority. And I simply hope that this will be the case. So we will have then a huge majority also for this difficult agenda which is ahead of us, and which requires simply more Europe and more capacity to build consensus, to look for compromises. That's just as usual stuff. But there are many challenges to it. There is also a risk that the centrist parties, and especially the right centrist right party, EPP, that they might also be kind of more open to the far right parties program like ECR. We already heard the commitment coming from Ursula von der Leyen, the probably future president of the European Commission, to showing some opening to the ECR, but the other parties that are supposed to give her the majority are very clear on this. This is out of question for them. So a lot of uncertainties and open issues still ahead of us.
Right. Some people say that this far-right pivot has caused some of the more centrist parties to also sort of shift to the right. And I think if they identify perhaps some issues with the Green Deal, with migration, with security that need to be discussed further, we're also looking at potential shifts in national parliaments, and I think that would be much more dangerous. So this kind of like walking over, I guess, a little bit to the right. Perhaps that's what's needed to show the responsiveness to European voters who are choosing, because by far and beyond, it's young voters that are choosing these far right parties.
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned probably the most important issue, which I think so far we don't see it. We are just optimistic because we see the results for the European Parliament, but we should also see what is behind that. Mrs. von der Leyen, I think, said that the center is holding, but what she meant actually is the center that might be that is actually limited to Brussels and Strasbourg. But when we look at what's happening on national front, it looks, of course, different, because even if you take the major member state, Paris, Berlin, Rome, Madrid, they are not EPP. They are not far right either, but there are many also governments in the European Union member states that already have far-right parties in the government, and there are also member states that have the impact on the governments coming from the far right, because the far right is giving them the majority for some situations where they need a higher support. So at national level, I think we are indeed seeing in Europe a clear shift towards the far right, if I can say it this way. And it would be interesting actually to see the result, the consequences of the decision of the French president, because today we are all divided probably in assessing what he did, the decision on dissolving the National Assembly, whether this will indeed strengthen the mainstream, the center, or whether this will show that the far right is still so mobilized, energized for after the victory, that they might also, in 3-4 weeks from now, also change the whole political situation in France. So that's also something to look at. But so the national level, absolutely, because European Union depends definitely on what's going on at the national levels. because we didn't discuss yet this political cycle, meaning that if we have President, Madame Ursula von der Leyen, or whoever it will be, but then there will be commissioners coming also from those member states where you have impact or influence of far-right parties on the decisions of national government, and those parties can also insist on having their representatives coming from their party as candidate for the commissioners. So the hearings in the European Parliament can be very, very difficult, and we might not have even the commission before the end of this year. So that's another challenge. And then those governments are also important members of the Council, and the Council of the European Union is a co-legislator with the European Parliament, and during the so-called trialogues, we can have also huge impact of the Council of those radical or those member states that have different view than the mainstream. And then they are also in the European Council making a lot of decisions. So there will be, potentially there can be also more conflicts between usually more progressive parliament and usually a more conservative council, in this case, council with the views which are reflecting to a bigger extent the far-right ideology or far-right ambitions.
Right. So what happens in France over the next few weeks into July will be absolutely critical. And then I think it's probably still too early to talk about what happens as far as the commissioners go and the makeup of the council right now. But now, before we go, we're almost out of time, but I'd like to ask you a little thread about Poland. And based on the results that we've seen here, we did see the Civic Coalition pulling ahead of Law and Justice. First time since 2015. This has been kind of a bad year for Law and Justice, if you will. We've seen lots of investigative committees in the Polish parliament, investigating scandals during their time as ruling party. Potentially that could have had an effect. But based on what we're seeing coming out and the results coming out of Poland, is there anything that we can read into that for next year's presidential elections? I'm interested to hear your opinion.
Well, you know that there are those moments where we are testing the strengths of the parties, and the elections are those moments. But I think we cannot just stop now, and we will have to work hard, I think, before now and the presidential election. I trust that Poles will just continue this march towards democracy and this going back to or coming back to Europe. I think Poles are absolutely fully aware of the importance of being in the current context of the Russian aggression or the war in Ukraine, how important it is for Poland to be within this family of democratic countries, because we know that it's not only Ukraine that cannot defend itself, it's also Europe or Poland, but Europe even cannot defend itself without the support of other democracies, especially the United States within the NATO framework, but not only. So I think that this security issue is for Poles so important that I think they will be, I think, sticking to this main line, which is democracy, Europe being together. You know, the history of Poland is showing clearly that we have never, when being alone, we have never been successful. So we know it very well. So I hope that the presidency of Poland, which will be since January, and the elections are later on during the year, so it will also show I think the Poland playing an important role in the European Union and taking over from Hungary, which will be starting the presidency in July. So there will be a lot of undone things. I think business will have to be completed by Poland, and then we will also have to cope with Ukraine's accession to the European Union. So there will be a lot of very important issues. So I hope that this will sort of raise this feeling of responsibility for Europe that we all have to develop.
So potentially a rocky road before a new beginning. Former MEP and first Polish EU Commissioner, Danuta Hübner, thank you very much for sharing your insight on these elections. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. All the best. Thank you.